And good afternoon. Welcome into Market Talk for Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. It is Election Day in America. I'm your host, Jesse Allen. Great to have you here on the program. Our program today brought to you by our friends at BOA Coolers. BOA Coolers, these things are just amazing. I love them so much. They are very lightweight. They're easy to use. It's like a gym bag, honestly. You carry it on your back. No bulky, heavy coolers to deal with that get in the way anymore. These things are fantastic. You can take them out with you going kayaking, maybe if you're doing some hiking, running, if you're playing golf, any sports, whatever you're doing, or out in the field during harvest season, which we're kind of wrapping that up across the country, planting season even. Take these with you. Keep yourself hydrated, keep yourself nourished. BOA coolers, 4 great colors. They're available now. You can get yours. I love the lime green one. All right. I got a couple of those. They're awesome. BOAcoolers.com. That is BOA, BOA Coolers.com. You can check them out today. Order yours. Tell them Jesse at Market Talk sent you there. That's BOAcoolers.com. Our guest today, another good friend of mine, bringing him on Market Talk here. We've chatted numerous times. He is with Iowa State University. Chad Hart joins us here on Market Talk. Chad, great to have you on. How are you today?
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you today.
Well, Chad, it's always good to catch up with you and see you with the wonders of technology. Me being in Tennessee now and you still in Iowa, but we get to see each other and converse, and it's always a lot of fun to catch up with you. And we were chatting a little bit before we started the broadcast. Election day, obviously, here in the U.S. I know we're waiting on the early returns, and a lot of folks are kind of anxiously awaiting the result of this presidential election. And I asked this question to start the broadcast yesterday. I'm going to ask it of you. Looking at the markets here the last couple of days and looking today as well, we saw beans up around 12 cents on the futures. Corn was up 3 to 4. We saw some downside in livestock, but it seems for the most part the market didn't really react too much to the election today. But what are your thoughts on that? How's the market been handling this presidential election?
Well, I think especially when you look at the action today, there's sort of the crops have been sort of going along, if you will, with what's been happening in the stock market. So I think today being election day, let's call this the markets just took a little sigh of relief and, said, you know what, when we're looking beyond the election, there's an expectation that we'll see probably a stimulus package down the line. We'll see some help coming to the general economy. And that was good for the stock market, good for the crop markets. But the problem is when it's good for the crop markets, that means additional feed cost for the livestock side. And I think that's where you saw that downward pressure when we're looking at the livestock industries.
Yeah. And, looking at the market today, kind of a risk on mood, it seems, as obviously the main U.S. commodities. You mentioned the stock market, but corn and beans. Let's start on the soybean side today. That November contract up 8.25 at 10.59. We're seeing some of those deferred months, 11 to 12 higher today. And we've kind of seen the soybean market run up, and it's pushing against some resistance right now around that 10.60, 10.50 mark. What are you seeing in soybeans today and just in general?
Well, what I'm seeing on the soybean side, as you mentioned, the idea is the nearby's run up tremendously. We've got a slightly inverted market here. A marketplace that is saying, if you've got beans right now, we want to see them right now. Bring them on in. And that goes to the demand side of the equation. When we're looking right now at feed demand for our livestock industries or export demand to the rest of the world, right now we're seeing some really strong demand out there pulling the crop into the marketplace early.
Sure. And I think you mentioned demand. One thing that is kind of interesting to me, soybean demand from Brazil. They're grappling with rising prices, and they're bringing in U.S. soybeans. Chad, can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's sort of like every once in a while we'll take a shipment up from them as well. It's just to remind, if you will, the domestic market, hey, we can pull it in from somewhere else if prices really get out of whack. But when you're looking at the global situation for beans, basically, if you're not the U.S. or Brazil, you're searching for beans right now. And, we're pulling them from everywhere. Brazil earlier this year sold a tremendous number of beans into the Chinese market. We're doing a lot of that now. And so that left Brazil, let's call it a little bit tight right now. And yeah, they're having to backfill, if you will, with some of our beans going into a few of their markets.
Sure. You mentioned China as well, and talking about the Chinese demand side of things, I really want to talk about that. Just overall, soybeans and corn with the U.S. Obviously, you mentioned we've seen some buying here throughout this year. It finally started to come to fruition. Where is that demand right now from the Chinese market for U.S. Soybeans and corn?
They've been ramping up for the past 3-4 months. You mentioned soybeans, tremendous sales there. Same thing on the pork side, but those are the two markets that we expected China to be in.
Mhm.
The big surprises to me are the moves in beef and in corn.
Mhm.
China went from being nothing to us on the beef side 2 years ago to now they're our fifth biggest export market. Corn, China, dabbled in it recently, but the idea is right now, as the data stand, they're they're going to be our number one export market this year if things hold out the way they are.
Mhm. And it's very interesting to think about because we, haven't seen that in recent years.
Right. And so this is a combination of a few things. I like to say that this is two viruses combined hitting these markets all at the same time. Right now, most people think of COVID-19, but I still want you to think about African swine fever and what that's done to the Chinese market. And so the combination has created a need for protein in China, a lack of animals there for a while, but they're rebuilding that herd now. And as they rebuild that herd and they try to get that protein, that's why they're buying both the protein, so the livestock sales we're seeing, but also the feed grain side. Hey, they're going to rebuild that hog herd and they're going to need a lot of feed to do that.
Talk to me about the basis side of things, Chad. In the U.S., we're seeing basis 50 to 70 cents, off of futures right now. What does that leave for marketing opportunities for producers, whether it be corn, soybeans? I mean, obviously, it all depends on your bottom line. But what are maybe some trends you're seeing in this market as we head towards the end of the year, which is traditionally kind of a quiet time of year?
Well, if you think about it, usually when you see futures increase the way we have over the past couple of months, usually when futures go that high, you see that basis really widen out.
Mm-hmm.
But in other cases, we're seeing here, it's that export demand, especially, that is trying to pull a lot of this commodity towards the river, move it down towards the Gulf, get it out to the rest of the country. And so this is a strange year. I mean, 2020 has been unique in many, many aspects,
Mm-hmm.
especially in livestock, or crop marketing. It's almost an inverse year. And what I mean by that is we saw our lows in prices when we typically see our highs. And now that we're here at harvest time, when we typically see our low prices, we're seeing some of the best prices we've seen all year on the future side. And
Yeah.
it's because of this weird setup of COVID-19 and, like I say, the African swine fever impacts here. And
Mm.
so that is creating some really strong prices for people to play with on the future side. And then it depends upon, is your crop getting sucked up into that export mix? And if it is, you're also seeing strengthening basis at the same time, which is a really great position for farmers to be in at harvest.
Sure. Well,
The
and
challenge,
yeah,
yep,
it's a
I'd say
challenge.
the challenge is going to be how long does that last, and do we see cracks in that export demand as we move into the new year?
Yeah, and it's something that we definitely have to watch. On the corn side, though, we see futures right around that $4 mark, and we kind of been holding some resistance here on the futures side. Some producers, the focus has been on corn, and then we saw the run up in soybeans, but it seems like there might be some spots for some profit taking here in corn, even though I think there's maybe some producers out there kind of hoping we could push through some of that resistance level still.
Yeah, we're hoping to get past 4, but the idea is when you're looking right now, you know, prices today are basically where they were at the beginning of the year. Demand is strong, and that gives farmers hope that we continue to push through this. it's going to have to be the export picture that drives us past this right now. But you also got to remember that even though we've had a drought, a derecho here in Iowa, we've had significant production problems, but I'm still staring at the USDA telling us this is the fourth largest corn crop we've ever produced. It's a great big crop, and that's what's really keeping a lid on where corn can go right now. And so until we see either that USDA production number come down or that some of these export sales turn into export shipments, especially into China, I think we're going to see this resistance at 4 hold for a while.
And that's something that farmers definitely going to be watching with a close eye, especially as they start to shift some of that grain, some of that corn into the bin for the winter months, and seeing if they can make some sales and maybe find some calls or puts depending on their marketing strategy. Chad, let's talk cattle. I think that's a good spot to go as we're talking corn here. And we saw a little bit of a strengthening last week. I know minor setback in slaughter, it sounds like, but really, depending on the results of this election, the market could get volatile. But I've been cautiously optimistic on this cattle market. What are your thoughts? And obviously, that price of corn is affecting feed costs. But what are your thoughts on this cattle market right now?
I would agree. I'm saying I'm cautiously optimistic. When you're looking here, export sales have been really strong. Domestic demand has been, I'll call it, re-emerging after all the COVID shutdowns and the issues that we had with restaurants being shut down and things like that. And so when we're looking at the demand complex for beef, really, really good right now. And again, the wild card here would be China. China is not a market where we've traditionally been large, but they've been booking a lot of beef over the past 3-4 months. Again, more of those sales turn into shipments. I think that puts a little bit of a fire underneath this market. And the other thing is that we've sort of caught back up given the production problems we had earlier this year. When COVID shut down the plants, created a backlog of animals. We've been working our way through that. The data I saw over the last couple of reports seems to indicate we're pretty well caught back up again. And again, that should help create some support moving forward for the cattle market.
And as well, the demand side, not only foreign but domestic, you got to think too with COVID on both cattle and hogs for beef and pork. Might be more people staying home for the holidays and might see a bit of an increase at the stores buying those Christmas hams and or roasts for family dinners or whatnot. That I would think that's another thing to think about as well. We'll have to see the next couple of weeks.
Oh yeah, and that's been the big issue that the livestock industry has really wrestled with this year was given the issues that we had, there was this definite shift in how U.S. consumers consume beef and pork. And the idea is that what we do at home is different than what we do in the restaurants.
Yeah.
And so you're right that if I'm looking at the beef market at home, you tend to concentrate more on those, the pot roasts. You do a few steaks, but the idea is it's mainly the roast and then the ground product that moves tremendous volumes as far as through the grocery stores.
Very true. The hog market, Chad, we've kind of seen some resistance here at the $65 mark on the futures side, kind of hanging there today. Not a lot of movement. It almost seems like maybe this market is hoping for a slower slaughter to maybe get a price bounce here. But then again, it seems like it's kind of hard to say on this hog market.
It is, but I always like to remind people of when you see $60 hogs as you go into the fourth quarter, that's not a bad place to be. If we're talking 40s, then we're nowhere in trouble there. But 60s, especially given this year, not bad. As you look out into 2021, we get out there June, July, August, you're talking about near $80. And the idea is I think it's setting up well for let's call it a good year considering, but not a great year. We're seeing great demand though. When I'm looking at domestic demand's been solid, export demand has been phenomenal. In fact, we're at record export sales as we look at this, this year's hog crop. And again, I hate to keep saying it, but it's China. China is driving a lot of this, but It's also places like, we've seen Mexico work its way back up. Canada's been pretty good in terms of sales. South Korea, Japan, even into Australia, we've seen additional sales. And so global demand for protein, and especially on the pork side, has been very strong this year, helping support those prices.
I know as well, Chad, and you've talked in the past, and not only about exports, but some things to watch as well with the wheat market and that playing an impact on core to beans and livestock. And I know we're seeing some weather challenges in wheat right now around the globe. How much is the wheat market playing into the other commodities right now?
Well, definitely for corn, when you think about competition globally in terms of that feed crop,
Hmm.
corn and wheat compete directly as far as feed for the global livestock industries. And yeah, as you mentioned, the problems we've seen here in the center part of the U.S. impacting wheat, the Black Sea region and the issues they've had there, that
Hmm.
has lit a fire under the wheat market globally, helped support those prices dramatically, and that's been leading to some backdoor support for the corn market. Going forward here, I think the real challenge will be, especially looking at what happens to that Black Sea region as far as the wheat crop there. While the U.S., we consider ourselves big in wheat, we're no longer the driving force when it comes to the global wheat market. And really, it's what happens out of Russia and Ukraine will sort of set the stage for that global wheat price.
Sure. Chad, a couple things for you here before we wrap up the program today. I know you're a stock market guy as well. The Dow and everything here on Tuesday seems to, be trending higher with election day. A lot of folks kind of surprised at that. Not too much higher, but a good move today. Overall, how much is the stock market going to play into things moving forward? Obviously, Wednesday could be a different situation depending on what we get for returns from election day. But what are your thoughts on what the stock market could do to the commodity market?
Well, like I say, I think when you've been looking at the crop side, where the stock market has moved, crop markets have tended to follow. And to me, a lot of that is tied to thoughts about getting to a stimulus package. And I think when we look at the action today, for example, we don't know the results. Nobody does. They're still coming in. But I think there's this expectation that no matter who wins, things will sort of settle down again, and that we'll see Congress work on a stimulus package very quickly here after the election. And I think that's been supportive over the past couple of weeks for both the stock market and the crop markets, and that's likely to continue post-election. But I do think you're right in that we're looking at more volatility depending upon how rocky this transition period is here, especially how long the results are unknown from the election. Because the longer that uncertainty drags out, the more uncertainty hangs over this idea of a stimulus package.
Very true. And I know a lot of folks got to be watching that here the next 24, 48 hours or longer, potentially, if we don't know results. One final thing, Chad, just watching this market in general, if I'm a producer out here looking for some opportunities to market some crop right now, it seems like that potential's out there as long as you look at your bottom line. What are some of your thoughts on maybe some areas that producers can look at for some marketing right now?
I would agree. I mean, when I'm looking at the strength in some of these crop prices, whether looking at the futures or in this case, especially as I look towards the river and see the basis levels there, I'm seeing some good sales opportunities on the cash side. What I'm also seeing, though, is what I'd call really good opportunities to maybe not necessarily put forward sales out there, but to maybe put in some price protection as I look out into deep into the spring. For example, when you mentioned both the corn and soybean markets are relatively flat from here into the springtime,
Mm-hmm.
which means I can sort of lock in the same prices I'm seeing today for out there 5, 6 months from now and hope to see some improvement. So maybe I'm putting on maybe some puts out there, looking a little longer to put in a price floor, and hopefully we'll continue to see these prices rise in through the springtime. But at least I can put in a really good price floor right now at a time when usually we're not looking to make that market move.
Sure. And I think that's great advice. Obviously, putting in that floor, if you're at a good break even spot or even a spot to take some profit, it seems like a good idea. Obviously, we know there's risk in all trading, but trying to be smart about it and consulting your advisors is always a good thing. Chad, any final thoughts for our listeners today on Market Talk you want to share?
Well, I think we hit upon the main ones, but I will say that, as we're looking here, volatility has been the name of the game in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
It will likely continue to be, but luckily, at least right now, I'd put it this way: volatility has been playing in the farmer's favor over the past 3-4 months. Hopefully, it continues to do that over the next 3 and 4.
We sure hope so. Chad, I appreciate the time as always, and can't wait to have you back on the program again down the road. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Jesse, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Chad Hart with Iowa State University joining us here on Market Talk today. Coming up tomorrow on the program, Mike Zuzolo of Global Commodity Analytics will join us, and he will be our guest here on Market Talk. We'll recap the election if we have results, and we will look at the markets coming up tomorrow here on Market Talk. You can learn more markettalkag.com. Thanks to our sponsor, BOA Coolers, boacoolers.com. And you can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff, and on your favorite podcast sources, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. This has been the Tuesday, November 3rd, Election Day edition of Market Talk. I'm your host, Jesse Allen. Have a great evening.